Having just kind of gotten through um, W.D. Ross's first part in his book, The Right and the Good, The Meaning of Right. I've read this before, but I've kind of just been pondering it a little bit and kind of sort of thinking about this a little bit, and I want to just kind of discuss what's going on here. In this beginning here, he talks about how terms like right and good are sort of ambiguous, and they can have abstractions because of it. And then he kind of goes through a couple of different ideas of what the right can be. Like he talks about Moore, G.E. Moore. He talks about how Moore talks about how the more about how the right is reducible to the production of the most overall good results. And then Jeremy Bentham, the British ethicist, has a different idea of the right, which is productive of the most general happiness. Bentham was a consequentialist, along with Mill. Mill did not ever attempt to define it, but what he kind of talks about here is he talks about he kind of ponders these different discussions of he kind of discusses and ponders these definitions of the right, and one thing I want to point out here is he kind of compares the right to the good here in discussing the meaning of right. He discusses, and not just like good, he kind of talks about the right man, the good man, and the morally good man. He has three definitions: the right man, the good man, and the morally good. So he's kind of just taking these two here, the right man and the morally good man. So he's sort of trying to think about if there's any correlation between these two terms, the right and the morally good. And he's thinking that, and then there's also discussions about how right is meaning how right is meaning productive of the most good, or yielding of the most good. So it can be thought that there's this immediate correlation between the right and the good, and he kind of discusses how these two terms, right and good, are definitely not the same thing, and are not as closely related as some people think that they are. And right, he kind of correlates the idea of right with ought, having duty, having obligations, moral obligations, and these things. And he's talking about how if you sort of honor these duties, obligations, and things that you're supposed to do, then you are being right. You are in the right. And what is kind of discussed here is, okay, I just want to state the overall discussion of Ross, what Ross ultimately discusses here, what his ultimate idea is here. He talks about how the right and the good, and doing actions that are right and good is not reducible to things on earth. He talks about how there's this kind of in meta ethics of right and good. There's this sense of kind of thought about just this sort of sense of reductionism, or there's a sense of reductionism in all of philosophy. Willard Van Orman Quine, in his two dogmas of empiricism, shoots down this whole thing of reductionism. He shoots down analyticity and reductionism. Now by reductionism, I mean saying that a certain term or a certain thing is reducible to such and such a thing. So it can be thought that it's thought by Moore. It's thought that the right is reducible to productive of the greatest good. That the right is that it reduces to the production of the most overall right. And so And then it's also discussed. Ross also discusses in this first part, in this first chapter, the meaning of right. He talks about how it can also be thought that the meanings of right is relative. So he's kind of addressing relativism here, how it's relative to certain societies, relative to certain populations. And he says that this, and then how it's reducible to certain definitions, and there are so many relative definitions of right, and how there's no real one concrete definition of right because it's also relative. And he states he argues this to not be the case now. And let me think. What did he say? That right is okay. I have it on here. And he actually quotes in the book. I have it on the computer here. An act is not right because it, being one thing, produces good results, different from itself. It is right because it is itself the production of certain state of affairs. So basically, when people like Moore and Bentham talk about how the right is the production of the most good results, he's talking about the states of affairs of right here. Kind of talking about the how there's a causal chain between one state of affairs of a right action being committed to another state of affairs where there's a certain good results that are coming out here. This is a consequentialist idea of what the right is. But then Bentham also says that if you have this certain right actions being done, that in this state of affairs a certain right action is done, then there's a causal chain into this state of affairs where there will be happiness that flows out. Ross says that this is not the case because when you have all these different definitions, they're consequential. So this is ultimately what makes this guy a huge deontological ethicist, is that he says an action is not right because it, being one thing, produces good results different from itself. It is right because it is itself the production of a certain state of affairs. So, in a way, if you were instead of having two different states of affairs, in consequentialist ideas, you have two separate states of affairs with a causal connection in between them, and you have a certain thing happens here, then a certain thing happens here, and that is not what it is. And so with this deontological idea of right, you have this one certain state of affairs, where, let's say, if you let's go back to my previous video about the Islot gap. I talked about how if just a random person drops all their stuff and falls down on the floor, you have the duty to help them up and help them pick up their stuff. There is not a different sense of there's not a different sort of state of affairs. There's only one state of affairs where if in this one state of affairs you do this one right action, you do this one ought by helping them up, helping them get all their stuff together, and help them be fine, make everyone stop watching them and decrease embarrassment, make the person feel better. There is, in that one state of affairs, good results. An act is not right because it, being one thing, produces good results different from itself. It is right because it is itself the production of a certain state of affairs. So we have one state of affairs here, and in the same state of affairs, there's better things that occur just because of the one action. And one thing I want to point out here is also in this one little thing about the meaning of right here, he talks about how there's a consequentialist idea of when you're doing certain duties and when you're committing certain odds, and you're fulfilling certain odds, that you do it because you want to have a sense of a sense of doing this act, doing this duty. You're doing this because you want yourself to feel good, and that's not what right is, because that's a consequential idea. It's a consequential idea for one state of affairs of you doing one right act to a different state of affairs of your feeling good. So that is, again, the wrong idea. And it's not the best thing to go about. So here he just kind of just talks about this, and he kind of states pretty good that there is this sense of there's this one this is a non-reducible sense of right. Now, I've read this book before, so I've kind of thrown in a couple things that are not in this one chapter, but I just wanted to throw this in to have a good discussion about this. So, and I will come back with the second chapter of this book next.